So Al, the next topic is going to be the Amiga, the
Mm,
Commodore Amiga. And I really wanted to pay some, well, homage to it really.
mm,
It's one of my favorite, you know, computers.
mm,
Great gaming machine back in the day.
mm.
Yeah, great gaming machine. And I've just got a lot of fun memories of it from my secondary school
Mm-hmm.
to college,
Yeah,
uni days. So it's, this is why I'm putting it out there because,
yeah.
gone but not forgotten, that sort of thing. What's your experience with it?
Yeah, I kind of grew up with it as well. I think trying to think I must have been from ooh, must feels like the age of 9, 10. Kind of growing up with it. My dad kind of brought one. Yeah, it's just been with me throughout kind of secondary school. And then I think that's by the time maybe it was first, second year, the PlayStation 1 and stuff like that then started to come out. But there's just that huge gap of, Amiga and kind of other things, whether it was the SNES and other things kind of in between. But my Amiga was I would always go back to it, regardless. I'd play my SNES game, but I would always go back to the Amiga.
Yeah, great machine,
Mm.
brilliant machine. But I think what I'll do is, I just want to give maybe people who listen to this who don't have the context of, what the bloody hell is this Amiga thing? What is it? So I'm just gonna give some information just to give them a sense of things.
Mm.
In my view, it's got a really rich history. There's a lot of fun facts around it.
Mm.
But this will make it old. It's now 35 years ago that the Amiga A1000 was launched.
Mm.
1985, developed by Jay Miner and the Amiga team. And this is during the kind of Silicon Valley boom, where the likes of Apple and the rest of them were kind of like coming up, and we had IBM PCs, and
Mm.
Microsoft were just coming up as well. Obviously, the Amiga that I owned, the A500, launched
Mm.
in 1987, and
Mm.
the last Amiga I owned, the A1200, 1992.
Mm. Mm.
Now, what was special about the Amiga? Well, you might say it was the first, and it was definitely the first multimedia computer.
Mm.
Yeah, computers didn't do multimedia. That's what people forget. What do I mean by multimedia? What I mean by multimedia is that they did graphics,
Mm.
animation, and music. That's what I really
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah.
It was a multitasking computer, preemptive. So basically, what I'm trying to say is years ahead of its time.
Oh yeah, for sure, for
Years
sure.
ahead of its time. And the hardware was really designed to be a game machine.
Mm.
I'm going to show how geeky I am. There's a way to multiplex the sprites, so you can easily develop a Space Invaders game on it, if people remember what that was. However, it was a little bit mismarketed at the time, and that's a lot to do with the way the games industry was at the time, because
Yeah.
it was really just marketed as a general purpose computer.
Mm-hmm.
There's some notable things people would have seen or remember about it, in terms of the bouncing ball demo, Tutankhamun's death mask done on Deluxe Paint, which was basically Electronic Arts. Deluxe Paint was Electronic Arts,
Mm.
and Sculpt 3D and the juggler, animation, which was juggling those balls. And by the way, that was ray traced. And other fun facts: Steve Jobs was said to have looked at the Amiga, but had kind of said it was too complicated. Too complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that guy loves simplistic, elegant design.
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft actually wrote Amiga Basic for the computer that was bundled with the machine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jack Tramiel owned Atari at the time and used to basically be the CEO of Commodore. Wanted the Amiga tech for Atari, but
Mm-hmm.
Commodore came in, and obviously Jack subsequently created the Atari ST competitor at the time. So you
Mm-hmm.
might say the Amiga almost never happened as we know it. It could have
Mm.
been the Atari Amiga. Calvin Harris, Calvin Harris's 207 debut album, I Created Disco, was made in his home studio using a 15-year-old Amiga 1200. A collection of old floppy disks belonging to, Andy Warhol was discovered, containing paintings he created on Amiga art programs.
Mm.
And he originally demoed D-Paint in the Amiga reveal, And I think this was in, CES.
Yeah.
And the classic 1990s sci-fi TV series Babylon 5 was made in part on
Mm.
Amigas. So, lots of fun facts, there. But I mean, let's get to the technology. I mean, the specs itself, what made the Amiga stand out? Well, for one
Mm.
thing, it could gen lock, which means you could overlay external video, with graphics, which made it good for video editing, TV production, and the like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the hardware and the software in the early 1990s provided a very low cost kind of editing suite for a few thousand US dollars versus tens of thousands. There was this piece of software called the Video Toaster. I think it was a software hardware solution that's well known.
Mm-hmm.
It found a market in 3D rendering. What I understood is it's because of the amount of memory it could address, which I actually didn't know till I kind of did a bit more digging.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was actually the secret ingredient to the Amiga was really the custom chips. These chips would
Mm-hmm.
kind of free the CPU. They could access the memory directly through, DMA. We talk about secret sauce all the time these days, right? But the Amiga had secret sauce well before its time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, secret sauce well before its time.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you compared it to the machines of the decade and in that time period, I'll compare it to the IBM PC-80, released in 1984 for 6,000 US dollars. 6,000 US dollars. It ran at
Yeah.
286, 6 to 8 megahertz, 256 kilobytes of RAM, but was only able to display 16 colors from a palette of 64. Yeah,
Yeah.
640 by 350 resolution, probably above average for its time.
Mm.
The C64, which was Commodore's home computer before the Amiga came along,
Yeah.
that ran at 8-bit, 6510, 1 megahertz, 64 kilobytes
Mm-hmm.
of RAM, a maximum of 16 colors at 320 by 200, but a decent enough sound chip, yeah?
Mm.
And that retailed for 595 US dollars.
Yeah.
The Amiga at the time, A1000, 1985, $1,300. Not cheap, not
Mm.
cheap. But it had 16-bit processor at 7.14 megahertz, would display 2 to 64 colors on screen, up to 4,996 colors on the hand mode, hold and modify, a 4,096 color palette, had hardware sprites, hardware scrolling, audio with full voice stereo sound, which allowed for samples, sound samples. So well before its time. 3 custom chips, Agnes, Denise and Paula, handling all of this. A Blitter, which was this block image transfer chip, which really meant it copied video memory from place to place, filled in
Mm.
polygons and did line drawing rapidly. And this is why the Amiga was such a good animation computer.
Mm. Mm.
It could basically leverage that piece of technology. The copper coprocessor, this video synchronization coprocessor, would actually allow it to have parts of the screen and display running at different resolutions. That's the flexibility.
Yeah.
So all in all, really, really ahead of its time. Really, really ahead of its
Yeah.
time.
And it was I guess the first really, I would say, mainstream retail affordable, I guess, PC. It was still expensive, but it was the more affordable kind of section. And I think that was your original kind of home PC that was really starting to kind of kick off from there. And it had those, it had the, I don't know if you remember it, Workbench,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. I look back in it, and I used to play with it quite a lot, and I used to think, this is pretty cool, this is pretty interesting. Even doing things like text to speech. And I was like, this is so ahead of its time. And it was actually so much fun. You could play for it with hours, not even playing games, and you could do those sorts of things, which are good fun.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking of fun, do you remember its version of blue screening? At that error message, was it the Guru meditation? They put a kind of a fun bit of text in its version of blue screening because I don't think the Amiga had memory protection. The story was they ran out of time to put it in or something along those lines.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember with there's certain games you needed multiple floppy disks.
Yeah.
And I'd actually have two stacked on extra floppy disk extensions, so I don't have to keep switching disks.
Same here.
I'd have both of them in at the same time.
Little things like that.
So
Fun things like that.
It was so good that you could you could just keep expanding it, buying extra things to kind of just make it a bit better. So yeah, it was such a great format, and such a kind of good product to have originally, and that you could build upon. And actually, probably was the kind of key thing that got me learning about computers and and how to build them.
Definitely. I mean, I think I also learnt C on it.
Mm,
Everybody had Amos, if you remember that thing.
mm,
You just did it. You could just do a lot with it.
mm.
It was a great hobbyist machine, if you like. You had kind of stuff like those sound tracker programs.
Yep.
They're like just audio trackers where you could just splice together kind of samples and create music with. Deluxe Paint was also kind of ahead of its time.
Mm.
I don't think Commodore actually understood what they had. I mean, that was the biggest problem. I mean, they
Mm.
had something that was so ahead of its time, and it was just it was a multimedia computer before there was actually the term multimedia.
Yep.
That was the thing, and it was a fairly, for its time, strong gaming machine. Obviously, it got superseded by some of the consoles like the Mega Drive and the SNES, and certainly something
Mm.
like a PlayStation kind of blew it out of the park. But Commodore had basically, I would say, invested in its development, because what they actually seemed to do was disband or shrink the design and development team behind it.
Mm. Mm.
If things had gone differently, I think the computer PC market today, and maybe even the games market today, the landscape that we have will be maybe somewhat different. But
Mm.
they never really pushed home their advantage. You
Mm.
know,
Mm.
they never really did that, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I think that's a story of mismanagement,
Yeah,
politics and other things that kind of got in the way as well, which is a huge shame because it was such a success at least in Europe, but it was one of those that it was such a powerful platform to build upon that it was a shame that it kind of disappeared over time,
yeah.
kind of from the back
I
of
mean,
that.
Commodore were no small company for their day either.
Mm. Mm.
If such a company existed today, I mean, they'd probably be up there with the likes of Apple and Microsoft and whoever else. They were very
Mm.
big, but I think their forte was business machines.
Mm.
I'm not sure where the gaming market was at the time. I think, to be honest, the gaming market had been stung, with what happened with Atari and the like.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So, potentially that would have been seen as a bit of more of a risky move. It's almost like a really regretful missed opportunity
Mm.
because it was so ahead of its time. They just needed to keep pushing, and that would have meant more competition. I mean, it's fair to say that the PC, as we know it today, maybe would have still won out because by
Mm.
sheer weight of numbers, because of the people developing for it and pushing it forward.
Mm.
It wasn't just one company; it was many companies pushing it forward.
Yeah.
It's legion. It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of their plans they
Yeah.
had that they never basically brought to fruition for the time sounded super, super impressive. Super, super
Yeah.
impressive. But it's actually still alive. Shockingly
Mm.
so, shockingly so. And there's a company, I think it's called Apollo. People are
Mhm.
doing a lot with FPGAs, so they built themselves kind of a standalone Amiga, for all intents and purposes, using an FPGA,
Mm.
but they've increased the specs. So this is the
Mhm.
Amiga you
Mhm.
probably would have got maybe 3 to 4 years after the A1200, maybe
Mhm.
5 years after the A1200 had Commodore still been in business, or the Amiga,
Mhm.
being owned by somebody who wanted to push it forward. I mean, this
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
has modern display modes. I mean, back then in the 16-bit era, we used to talk about the size of the color palette, right? But we don't do that anymore. We talk about
Mm.
the color gamut and whatnot. The nits.
Yeah.
They've even taken it upon themselves to further develop the 68,000 CPUs. So they've got this thing called a
Mhm. Mhm.
68,080, which never existed, by the way. It's just them, right, taking this thing and extending it using this FPGA.
Mhm. Mhm.
I don't know, and it's meant to be. I don't know. There was a number. I think it was either 1,000 times more powerful than A500.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It runs at a very modest clock speed, and I kind of read somewhere that the end game might be for them to actually produce a real bit of physical silicon.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
'Cause I don't know if you know the situation with the Amiga, but when Commodore went under, all the IP and assets were kind of split apart. So you have
Mm-hmm.
multiple people who own this stuff, and
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
none of them can agree.
Yeah.
I think this thing is built on like open OS. I don't think it's Kickstart. It's not Amiga OS, but
Mm-hmm.
it's its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
I've actually running a copy of it at home. They've gone
Mm-hmm.
around that kind of whole the legal and intellectual property rights thing. It's all very interesting stuff. I mean, that people are still trying to keep this thing alive. Why they're doing it, no idea. Yeah, but they obviously love the machine. It's a
Yeah.
labor of love, no doubt about it.
Labor of love, and maybe it's to keep some of the older assets on, whether it was written in Amiga's Amiga OS, etc., to be more alive, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
and hopefully they've already. I guess most of the ROMs nowadays are available, but whether they've
Yeah,
got the originals and save those down, because I think whether it was floppy or whichever format, those degrade over time. So hopefully they've got those.
there's a bit of software you can buy. I can't even remember the name of it now because I looked into it. It's for preservation, really. So
Mm-hmm.
you can get hold of all the ROMs and all of that kind of stuff. All of that's available.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Who knows? We might see a comeback of the machine at some point. It'd be a
Yeah.
miracle, but who knows?
No, I mean, there was some classic games which are, I guess, trying to think if they might have been Amiga only in some cases, but I guess there was quite a few also that were ports as well. And I guess most people probably weren't really. Was a mix of things, right? With Amiga, you could use it for multiple purposes, and gaming. I guess as we were younger, I'm sure we were probably gaming it more than actually working on it. But
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
I guess to the more other crowd, the consoles, the NES, the SNES, those things are starting to kick off, right? Mega Drive, Sega Master System, all those sorts of things were also in parallel, kind of coming out at the same time. So, I think when people look back, they'll probably more people would think more around those things. The NES and the SNES, the Mega Drives.
When the Amiga had the right developers behind it, it could do
Hmm.
some amazing stuff.
Hmm.
Comparable to the NESs and the Mega Drives, especially if you looked at the A1200, all that it
Hmm.
could do.
Hmm.
I mean, it wasn't what everybody wanted because it was less than everybody wanted, but it was still
Hmm.
it was still capable.
Yep. 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 Yep.
There were a lot of classics that were on it, Speedball and some of the
Hmm.
Bitmap Brother games. Psygnosis started on it. Team 17, who is still going in some shape or form now.
Hmm.
There were a lot of good-looking games. There's so many. I mean, like we did that podcast where
Oh,
we
kind of favorite games one. Yeah,
yeah
yeah, that was
there were
good.
so
Yeah.
many, but it was definitely it was a great there's some great shoot 'em ups on it. Um, I would say it had stuff like It Came from the Desert, Defended the Crown, those sort of classics. I mean, I played
Yeah.
Flashback and Prince of Persia on it.
Yeah.
Speedball 2, Speedball 1,
Supercars was one of my
Supercars,
favorites.
exactly, Lotus.
Yeah, and more RPG type ones, but Space Crusade and Hero Quest. I sunk so many hours into that.
All
It was
Captive
insane.
and stuff like that. I mean, Syndicate was
Mm.
on it.
Syndicate. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Populous was on it.
Mm.
God, there's so many. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, he even managed kind of like Monkey Island, but that had about 12 to 14
Mm.
discs. You know what I mean? So that was a
Yeah.
disc-robbing nightmare. You had Dragon's Lair on it.
Mm.
That sort of thing. And there's so many games you can name on it. Apart from IK Plus,
Mm.
it wasn't I say the best machine for beat 'em ups. And I'm being unfair here. It wasn't the best machine for Street Fighter 2 like beat 'em ups,
Mm.
but it actually had a few reasonable attempts.
Mm.
Reasonable attempts.
Well, and I guess that was the interesting thing, right? Because on the Amiga, there wasn't really trying to remember. I don't remember there being joypads. I remember having joysticks, which I don't think most of the most of the kids these days wouldn't recognize what it is.
Yeah, they're missing out because I know for sure, right? Playing a shoot 'em up on a joystick is a different kind of experience. Different kind of experience, in my view. That was the other thing. It's back to progression of the machine.
Mm.
You're so far ahead. You don't push the technology along.
Mm.
Again, single button joystick, where everybody else is going kind of 6 button. That's going to impact
Yeah.
how the game feels to play.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm, mm.
and people weren't paying enough attention to that. I mean, one
Yeah.
one game, however, that it couldn't play was or couldn't do well was Doom, and many
Mm,
people say that was pretty much a death for the Amiga as a games machine at that point.
yeah. But I think the Amiga, the sound chip, was much better than quite a few of the consoles, right? At the time, I
The
think.
quality of the sound, definitely.
Mm,
The quality of the sound. I mean, by the time the A1200 came out, it probably had fewer channels than it needed. It really
mm,
should have been an 8-channel sound chip or something like those lines, or 16-channel, whatever they could do.
mm, mm,
But it never happened. The sound chip itself is a really good one. I mean, sound samples.
mm,
It had the chip memory, which the sound chip could directly access, and all of that sort of thing. But I mean, why it was so bad at Doom is, one of its strengths with the planar graphics it had was also a weakness as far as kind of doing something like Doom.
mm.
The PC had this thing called chunky pixel mode. Planar mode graphics, you had to do five or six times the amount of work
Mm,
versus what you could do with a chunky pixel. It kind of worked on bit planes or something,
mm, mm, mm.
but that's the thing. Some of the designs they had coming really were addressing that, but we never got to see them. And this kind of this vampire FPGA does some of this as well.
Mhm.
It's fascinating. If I had infinite time and money, I would actually get myself one to see what it'd be like. Yeah, it's such a classic machine, and I think people have basically forgotten that there were some very notable game studios that started life on the Amiga.
Mm.
Do you know Rockstar North actually was
Mhm.
formerly
Mhm.
DMA, who did Menace and
Mhm.
Blood Money? They also obviously did Lemmings.
Mhm.
That's the
Mhm.
heritage, the legacy. Obviously, Psygnosis, who did kind of Shadow of the Beast,
Yeah.
certainly to look at, one of my favourite Amiga games. They closed in 2020. They were part of Sony, so
Oh yeah, yeah,
Wipeout
yeah,
and the like.
yeah. Yeah. They did. What was the other games? They did Destruction Derby and stuff like that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of good games those guys came out with.
exactly. Electronic Arts, well, it gave us Deluxe Paint. Deluxe Paint, classic, right? Not quite a game,
Yeah.
but everybody knows Deluxe Paint.
Yeah.
It's a crying shame it disappeared, but I guess with the way that the Windows PC was developing, and the lack of development Commodore and Amiga, it was a matter of time. I kind of recall having my A500. When did the A1200 come out? 1992. And the A500 came out
Mhm. Mhm.
1987. So that's 5 years. And also,
Mhm. Mhm.
the A5000 was, what was that? Is that 1985? So I've got my maths wrong here. A1000 first Amiga 1985. A500 1987. 2 years
Mhm.
later.
Mhm.
The spec hadn't really changed. Same spec. Yeah.
Mhm.
A1200 1992. So you might say there
Mhm.
was a 7 year lag between when the underlying technology itself was refreshed. It's like us in a PC space waiting for a new GPU
Yeah.
and only getting it after 7 years.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
The
Mhm.
other thing to this is that the A1000 was delayed, and as much as I understood it, the chips themselves were ready to go, but they needed to find a buyer. So the technology itself was ready before
Mhm.
1984.
Mhm.
That's quite a long wait.
Mhm.
So what did Commodore do? Yeah, they gave us the A600. Complete waste of time, and they wasted their time basically creating some sort of a, was it a C64 Plus or some nonsense like that? I can't even remember. They actually tried to repackage it with C64. Total nonsense. And when it came to the end, A1200 I liked as a machine, but obviously we all say we wish it could have been better. But the
Mm.
CD32, that has truly got to go down in history as the ugliest games console I've ever set eyes on. That is such an ugly product. I mean, I just can't understand what they were thinking.
Well, that was their attempt at pushing against the other consoles, right? That was their
I know,
attempt,
but
right?
it was like almost kind of like 3 years too late for one thing, technology wise. I mean, if they had developed a better, chipset on the A1200, that
Mm.
definitely would have made it. I mean, it was the same. They used the same technology as the A1200. it would have made its way
Mm.
into that. So that was one thing, and the other thing was, my God, it was the ugliest thing I've ever seen. The Amigas have I think, a heritage of actually looking quite nice. Yeah,
Mm.
nicely designed, and nice color palette on the hardware. But this thing was like a light, well, I don't even call it a medium grey. Was neither black nor white. You know, the controller. God knows what that controller was. It was an upside down controller. Bright idea was that it looked really cheap.
Mm.
It looked terribly cheap. Part of me, when I saw that, I thought to myself, this is really the end.
Yep.
Because you can
Yep.
release a product like that, that means it's the end.
Yeah, and they probably spent a lot probably trying to make it work, but they were clearly going to be falling behind versus the other gaming consoles that were out there.
Yeah.
Um, Probably the Mega Drive and the SNES were so popular at that time. It almost felt it was probably almost
Yeah,
impossible
and
for them at
better,
that point.
better gaming machines. Obviously, they weren't
Mm.
multi-purpose machines, but the reality is that there was such a lag between the technology refresh that should. I mean, they should have been put out a refresh at
Mm.
worst, every 3 to 5 years in order to maintain that
Yeah.
technology advantage. And had they been ahead at the time when all this was happening,
Mm.
and had they had someone at the helm who understood what the Amiga was, it's not a business
Yeah.
machine. Let's be honest here. This thing's for creatives and it's for games. Those are the
Yeah.
two markets you have. It's a great kind of animation machine. It's a great rendering machine. The video toaster, video editing. It's great
Mm.
for audio. They kind of stuck some MIDI ports into it. God knows what would have happened. MIDI's not a thing now, but I mean back then it was a
Mm.
thing. And then kept on iterating the graphics and sound hardware, and did something about a controller, because obviously they conned on right towards the end because they gave the
Mm.
CD32 a 6-button controller,
Yeah. Yeah.
as
Yeah.
ugly as it was, right?
But
But
that
by
was
then it
way
was
too late.
way
Way
too
too
late,
late.
way too late.
And by that point, I don't know how many joysticks I'd gone through because I don't know if you had the same problem, but I went through a lot of joysticks.
I didn't, because I used to have this. Well, and I'd gone through a few. Don't get me wrong.
Mm.
I basically used the Competition Pro 5000, which
Mm-hmm.
had that metal shaft
Okay.
and didn't have a lot of travel.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. That's
I
probably a
managed to
worthwhile
break a
investment.
couple.
If I did that at the beginning, that would have.
What did you have, a quick shot or something?
No, I just went through joysticks after joystick because like just playing so many games, it just gives over time, and suddenly like the whole thing becomes loose, and
Yeah,
then it just sort of disintegrates.
the Competition Pro, mate.
Mm.
I mean, there's no telling what the Amiga would have been like if it basically had continued. I mean, I'm sure the computing space would have been a bit more interesting and a bit more lively.
Mm.
And it was so far ahead. I mean, if they could have kept pushing out the bolt, if they
Yeah.
had made the right decisions, it'd be interesting to basically do kind of a podcast or a
A
bit of
what if?
content.
What if
Yeah,
Amiga took over the world?
what if? What would it look like now? What would it mean for the competition?
Mm.
It is really one of the most regretful things I felt in the technology space, that this thing didn't do better than it could
Mm.
have,
Yeah, but
because everything was
actually
so far behind it.
we should do something like that because there's been technologies over the years that have been better, could have,
Yeah, it's funny you should
So
say that, because I've
we
been
should
brewing some ideas for
mm,
that.
mhm.
It's
um,
science fiction, but I love science fiction.
yeah. I mean, the interesting thing would have been that it would have been, because it was PC and Mac, right? I mean, and it would have been one of those. It would be a third. It would be a third competitor, if anything, right? That's what it feels
Why?
like.
Why not? Why not? I mean, the more competition, the better. And
Mm,
I miss the days of the 8 to 16-bit, and maybe up to the 32-bit,
mm,
era, where you had such a multitude of machines to choose from. It was almost overwhelming. You
mm,
had machines like the Sharp. I think it was the X6800. You had FM Towns in Japan,
mm,
the MSXs.
mm.
I don't know if you ever caught eyes on the Elan Enterprise.
No.
I'm a bit of a 8-bit, 16-bit geek when it comes to machines, because I used to cover all of these machines, right?
Mm.
The Dragon 32, the Auric, one, and Auric Atmos. I'm just rolling it out now.
Oh, all this stuff that you're saying to me reminds me of games magazines and
Correct.
demo discs on the front.
Correct. The golden era of computing, eh? You know what I remember as a kid, right? I used to have this. I don't know where I got it from. I must have got it from W.H. Smith's or something. It was a small color, and good quality photos front to back. Basically, every page was a different computer, and it give you the kind of high level specs of the thing, and maybe kind of a paragraph. And I remember as a kid reading that thing, and it was reasonably thick. I think there was at least 100 pages in it.
Nice, yeah.
But I remember reading it front to back over and over and over again because just reading about these specs. It's kind of like having your do you remember trumps? Those cards. Yeah, but
Yeah,
in a
top
book,
trumps.
top trumps, but in a book for computers. And there were so many of them. Al, there were so many of them. I mean, these days it's kind of boring, because you have your Windows PC and you can have either AMD or Intel in it, or you could have the Nvidia AMD and maybe Intel in it, and that's kind of pretty much it. Or you can have a Corsair keyboard or some other keyboard, or in that way it's good. Like it's Lego for adults, but miss the kind of the crazy amount of choice. And some of these computers were awful as well, but probably unusable as a computer. But
yeah, and back in those days, I think you would. Well, the internet wasn't a thing, right? So
no, it wasn't a thing.
You don't have access to that level of information as we do nowadays,
exactly.
right? So
yeah, exactly. Magazines and books, they were everything. Yeah, and with our nostalgia and Amiga kind of itch scratched, I think. I think it really is time, after giving much love to the Amiga. I'm not going to say Commodore Amiga. I think we should just take the Commodore part out of it, just the Amiga. The visionaries were the people who created it, and the people who brought it down were the people who were trying to sell it. With our love given to that classic computer, I think it's time to move on to the next topic.
Cool.